Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anthony Chimolino. I'm the Artistic Director of the Stratford Festival of Canada, and I want to welcome you to this sitting of the Stratford Festival Court of Appeal. It is our 5th annual sitting, and once again, we have the honor of having an extraordinary group of individuals with us. And today we're under the leadership, this court is presided over by none other than the Supreme Court of Canada's Chief Justice, Beverley McLachlin. I want to say a profound thanks to everybody involved today, but especially to the Chief Justice. Her good nature and good humor in doing these events has served as a source of education and a way of better understanding how our courts work across this country, and her leadership is just to be commended. This is a Stratford Festival Forum event. There's almost 200 of them. And they explore what our plays on our playbill mean to the world we live in today. Because after all, these plays capture the hard-won knowledge of those who came before us. And so these events, which take place in mornings and around the playbill times, are hosted by actors, extraordinarily accomplished individuals from around the world, experts in all sorts of different things. They range from concerts to lively discussions, evenings of comedy, play readings. What they all have is that each one of them helps us understand our world a little bit better and understand this theater a little bit better. They are enlightening, they are humorous, they are often very moving, and sometimes they're all those things in one sitting. So next time you come to Stratford, please have a look at the calendar and see what forum event you can take in. I promise you, it'll make your experience even richer. When I first introduced the idea of the forum years ago, I spoke to our board, and one board member came forward and said, I have an idea. And that person was none other than Guy Pratt. And yeah. Guy said, look, I think we can do this mock trial, and I think we can do it in such a way that it'll be very, very interesting, very lively, and I think I've got some ideas for casting. Now imagine, if you will, Guy is a young man, such a promising career of honest work and service in the theater, and instead he gets distracted, led astray by the glitz and filthy lucre of litigation law. It's a sad story, but we're happy that he is finding his roots once again. Now, today's event will be broadcast around the world with our partners, CBC Ideas, and so if you want to hear it again, you can probably catch it on a podcast. We want to thank CBC Ideas for their role in this. Also, today, we have a very, very lively topic, which we chose a year ago. Some things never go away. In Romeo and Juliet, Romeo's banished, and there's a travel ban put in place. Now, there's a court somewhere south of Stratford, Ontario, that in a few months is going to be hearing this very case. Well, not quite this case, but so we thought we in Canada don't want to be second to any. We're going to take the leadership role and have this case today. I want to say some thank yous before I introduce the participants. I want to thank, of course, Guy and Mary Pratt for their generosity and hard work that make today's event possible. Thank you. The firm of Borden, Ladner, and Gervais, who are so generous and support this event, as do the Advocates Society, as does the Advocates Society. To both the Advocates Society and Borden, Ladner, and Gervais, a deep thank you. And I want to thank all the participants today. Seriously, the casting department went nuts. This is like an extraordinary group of stars. And I want to thank all of you for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, if you think you might need a lawyer, just look around. I think you might get lucky. All right. Speaking of extraordinary individuals, I want to introduce my partner at the festival, the person who really is the brains of the operation, the hard work behind the operation, and sadly also the talent behind the operation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Executive Director of the Stratford Festival, Anita Gaffney.
Great, thank you. You're the beauty of the operation. Welcome, what a great crowd. The Supreme Court of Stratford has been honored to have such depth of wisdom in the justices who have ruled in these proceedings over the past 4 years, and this year is no exception. Please rise for the entrance of our judges. The Right Honourable Beverley McLachlin, Chief Justice of Canada, the Honourable Catherine Fraser, Chief Justice of Alberta, and the Honourable Justice Thomas Cromwell, former Justice from the Supreme Court of Canada. You may be seated. Today's appeal will be argued by two of Canada's top advocates. Please welcome Sonia Bjorkquist, representing the Crown in the person of Prince Escalus of Verona, and Peter Griffin, representing the accused, Romeo Montague of Verona, who is challenging the legality of his banishment. So we're welcoming Sonia Bjorkquist, Peter Griffin. Romeo is not able to join us today, so his beloved Juliet is standing in for him, sometimes known as Sarah Farb. And Prince Escalus, sometimes known as Juan Kioran. For lay people in the audience, which there probably isn't a lot, but even for myself, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the proceedings. We'll first present Prince Escalus's banishment of Romeo from the production of Romeo and Juliet. So we'll run a clip first. That'll be followed by the examination in chief by counsel for the Crown, Sonia Bjorkquist, of the Right Honourable Adrienne Clarkson, 26th Governor General of Canada. And Madam Clarkson will be providing her expert opinion on the absolute right of rulers to ban dangerous people from traveling to the state whose peace they jeopardize. This will be followed by the cross-examination of Madam Clarkson by Mr. Montague's counsel, Peter Griffin. We will then move to the argument, starting with Romeo's counsel challenging the legality of the banishment order and the Prince's counsel seeking to defend its constitutionality. Immediately after the legal argument, the court will render its judgment. Roll the clip.
Where are the vile beginners of this fray?
O noble prince, I can discover all, the unlucky manage of this fatal brawl. There lies the man, slain by young Romeo, that slew thy kinsman, brave Mercutio.
Oh, my cousin! Oh, my brother's child! Oh, prince! Oh, cousin! Husband! Oh, the blood is spilled of my dear kinsman! Prince! As thou art true, for blood of ours, shed blood of Montague! Oh, cousin!
Benvolio, who began this fray?
Tybalt here slain, whom Romeo's hand did slay. Romeo that spoke him fair, and urged withal your high displeasure. All this uttered with gentle breath, calm look, knees humbly bowed, could not take truce with the unruly spleen of Tybalt, deaf to peace, but that he tilts with piercing steel at bold Mercutio's breast, who all is hot, turns deadly point to point. Romeo, he cries aloud, hold, friends! Hold, friends! Friends, part, and twixt them rushes, underneath whose arm an envious thrust from Tybalt hit the life of stout Mercutio. And then Tybalt fled, but by and by comes back to Romeo, who had but newly entertained revenge. And to it they go like lightning, for ere I could draw to part them, was stout Tybalt slain. And as he fell, did Romeo turn and fly. This is the truth, or let Benvolio die.
He is a kinsman to the Montague. Affection makes him false. He speaks not true. I beg for justice, which thou, prince, must give. Romeo slew Tybalt. Romeo must not live.
Romeo slew him, he slew Mercutio. Who now the price of his dear blood doth owe?
Not Romeo, prince. It was Mercutio's friend. His fault concludes but what the law should end, the life of Tybalt.
And for that offence, immediately we do exile him hence. I have an interest in your hate's proceeding. My blood for your rude brawls doth lie a-bleeding. But I will amerce you with so strong a fine that you shall all repent the loss of mine. I will be deaf to pleadings and excuses. Nor tears, nor prayers shall purchase our abuses, therefore use none. Let Romeo hence in haste, else when he is found, that hour is his last. Bear hence the body and attend our will. Mercy but murders, pardoning those that kill.
My name is Sonia Bjorkquist, and I am counsel for Prince Escalus. My client, Prince Escalus, is here with us today. My first witness, actually my only witness, is Madam Clarkson. I intend to qualify Madam Clarkson as an expert witness called to testify on behalf of the Prince on the subject of the royal prerogative. Madam Clarkson has been sworn. Please state your full name for the record.
The Right Honourable Adrienne Clarkson.
What is your professional background, Madam Clarkson?
I would say that I am perhaps best known for my work as a journalist on television, and for several number of decades I exercised that. I then went as the Agent General for Ontario to France, where my duty was to secure the plant for the Renault 19 to come to Brampton, which just happened to be where the Premier of the province had his seat. I spent 2.5, 3 years doing that, was successful and stayed for another 2. Then I became the 26th Governor General of Canada. And I co-founded the Canadian Institute for Canadian Citizenship. I'm also Colonel-in-Chief of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, the most storied infantry unit in our country. And I have a not very well disguised fondness for the military, a deep understanding of what makes that all work. I am a privy councillor, as you know, and therefore can be privy, and frequently have been, to state secrets. And oh yes, every year I give a cup for the best hockey played by women who, of course, play the best hockey.
Madam Clarkson, what is your educational history, briefly?
I have a BA and MA. I cannot be brief. I'm sorry, Council, I cannot be that brief. I have a BA and MA from the University of Toronto. I have a diploma for the teaching of French in foreign countries from the Sorbonne, and I hold a number of honorary doctorates, including one from the State Mining Institute in in former Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, which just happens to be Vladimir Putin's alma mater. And I also hold an honorary doctorate from the University of Siena, but never mind. It doesn't. Those things don't matter. I am principally interested in my prince and the work that I do for my prince. I only counsel
We'll come
my
to that
prince.
in a moment, Madam Clarkson.
My prince.
We'll come to that in just one moment. And I can see that Mr. Griffin, on behalf of Romeo and Juliet, is getting a little fidgety, so I'll just ask you one more question before I ask the court to qualify you. Have you published in your field?
I've published a lot.
May I ask the court to qualify Madam Clarkson as an expert on the royal prerogative in relation to matters of state security?
Immediately.
Madam Clarkson, I will now ask you to set the stage for why we are here today in this honourable court. And we have seen a clip of the scene in question, but what is your understanding of the events that led to Romeo's banishment?
My understanding and the way in which I've explained it to my dear prince, because after all, I do advise him, always his decision in the end. He decides everything. It is he who makes up his mind on how he rules, what he's going to do, how he's going to do it. I am only his humblest servant. I am his very humblest servant, and indeed, I am like the mote in the beam of the sun. But you know, I did explain to him, not that he had to have it explained to him at all, he saw for himself, that these were tragic circumstances. You know, Romeo is terribly impulsive. He's madly in love, he's infatuated. He goes from romance to romance, really so difficult. A 16-year-old like that is adolescent. And then there's background of this family feud, this terrible Montague Capulet thing. It's a dreadful thing. So I explained to the prince, who didn't need it, explained to him, of course. I explained to him that this was a matter of personality. It was also a matter of some power struggle. Not that that interests us. We are above that. The prince and I do not worry about power. It is something that he has inherited, and we are delighted with that. However, we do have the background of this long-standing feud, which has been impossible to resolve, and Romeo interjected himself into this duel between his beloved friend Mercutio and then Juliet's cousin Tybalt. And when Romeo stepped in, unfortunately, Tybalt got in the last stab and killed Mercutio. Tybalt ran off, and had he stayed off, perhaps right now, Romeo and Juliet would be on their honeymoon in Niagara Falls. Watching the rainbow over the falls. Well, he came back full of insults, and Romeo killed him. I know, Romeo killed him. We can't get around that. Romeo was maddened with jealousy and family pride. And also, I have to say, you did see the hysteria of Juliet's mother. Not a stable personality, I'm afraid. Not a stable personality. These children, they only reflect what their parents are like. As I've said to the prince, who did not have to have this pointed out to him, he understands the paternal role deeply himself. As I said to him, you can't blame these children, and we must, in a way, help them. You have to help them.
Madam Clarkson, what happened after Romeo slew Tybalt?
Oh, the prince's judgment was, of course, swift, clever, brilliant. For that offense, immediately do we exile him thence. He did immediately, because the prince always understands. Ah, yes, in that wonderful voice that he has. That wonderful voice. And always prepared, not making impromptu judgments. He always knows what he is doing, our prince.
And then, Madam Clarkson, how did we end up here today in this Honourable Supreme Court of Stratford?
Well, you know, Romeo's very young, and he needs help, and so he phoned around to people he thought were lawyers, labor lawyers, family lawyers, real estate lawyers. Actually, he was put onto them by a mortgage broker that he had been talking to. All the recommendations that Mr. Griffin would be the best for this job of challenging the constitutionality of the banishment order, or lawyers' fingers who straight dream on fees. However, we know that he did discuss all of this, and we are happy that he did, and there we are.
What is the role of Prince Escalus in protecting the security of Verona?
I am only the humble servant of the prince. I only advise, I only warn, I cannot give consent. But the prince knows that he has the absolute duty to protect. As the ruler of Verona, generally speaking, the prince has broad authority to protect the state from, shall we say, undesirables who threaten the city-state's security.
Madam Clarkson, what is the royal prerogative and how does it apply to city-state security?
As you know, counsel, since ancient times, the princes of Verona have had the royal prerogative to do all things necessary to protect its ancient citizens from security risks. The prince's chief and most important function is to protect Verona, our jewel of a city, from rebellious subjects, enemies to peace, profaners of this neighbor's stained steel. With that responsibility comes enormous power. The prince is cognizant of this. He knows the power that he has. Near absolute power. I do say near.
And before we get to the near part of it, how does exile relate to the prerogative powers in relation to state security?
I was so looking forward to your asking this. We have discussed this frequently, my prince and I, our prince, me. The concept of bans and banishment is recently making a resurgence, in part due to the news out of our neighbors to the wall-less south. By which, of course, I mean Mantua. Historically, banishment never would have entered the equation. You know, never. Princes can and did simply forfeit the life of the offender. Off with their head. Awful to think of it. Never, never does our prince think in those terms. Mercy is of his very essence. But to be honest, execution is often the easiest solution. The prince often suggests, in late night conversations after we've gotten back from some event and we're chatting and we have cognac, that he'll go back to these kinds of extreme measures. But public opinion is very important to him. The prince cares much about public opinion. As he was fitting out his new spring wardrobe the other day, he summoned me and asked me to give my opinion on this question. And I said, well, actually, we formulated after I had made some suggestions. Execution hasn't really been acceptable in Verona since the Verona Charter of Rights and Freedoms adopted in April 1582. In my opinion, if the prince's prerogative historically included the power to summarily execute undesirables, the ultimate power, then he must also have the power to draw back, to restrain himself, to show mercy, and commute the sentence with something less extreme. And that, of course, was banishment to Mantua. Much preferable to a death sentence. And, you know, Mantua is a great little place. It has a wonderful rigatoni dish, alla arrabbiata. I recommend it highly. They have their homegrown capers there, a little bit of red pepper, their own olive oil. Actually, it comes from Pienza, but they never tell you that. And beautiful public squares and fountains. Oh, it's a lovely place. It's a wonderful place. If you're going to be banished to Mantua. And many people don't know this, but Juliet's family also used to live in Mantua.
Madam Clarkson, what are the conditions on the prince's power to exile undesirables from Verona, if any?
Well, experts on the royal prerogative, including myself, have always understood very broadly where state security concerns are at stake. Determining who's in, who's out, on national security grounds is a fundamental exercise of city-state sovereignty. The only condition, if it is a condition at all, is that the prince must deem the exercise of the power to be in the interests of the state.
Who is in the best place, Madam Clarkson, to determine what constitutes a risk to the security of Verona?
In my mind, no question. By inheritance, by birthright, by divine right, the right of kings and princes, the prince, our noble prince, is best placed to determine what constitutes a risk to the security of Verona and to determine how best to protect the citizenry from that risk.
And in what circumstances can the exercise of the prince's power be questioned?
You certainly cannot find me on the Sunday morning talk shows asserting that the prince's powers will not be questioned. The prince must have a proper purpose grounded in national security. I was slightly concerned in this case that the prince might have a personal interest in the stake here, but I dismissed that. He has a slight blood relationship to Mercutio, but I believe that the prince's speech exiling Romeo was rather uncharacteristically discombobulated because of this small
Well,
word.
maybe, Madam Clarkson, that's a matter that we could leave. The court doesn't need to hear about that particularly. Let's talk about the prince's purpose with his order exiling Romeo. How does exiling Romeo advance Verona's security, if at all?
Oh yes, of course it advances it. You know, Verona has been in a state of near insurrection for a little bit of time, some time. We have discussed this. We are concerned with it, the prince and I. And it stems back to this ancient grudge between the two leading households, the Capulets and the Montagues. And we feel we have to deal with this from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, as they say. We are dealing with it by treating the police well. We have given them new, completely integral brass buckles for their boots. Everything on the buttons is completely brass, not just plated. A lot of these things matter.
We may be getting a little far afield here.
Every time we settle the peace, feuds break out again. They simmer to the boil, and actually it's like some poison in the body politic. It comes to a head, it perhaps breaks, and we are terrified of infection.
What is the key concern with Romeo remaining in Verona?
First, Romeo may not be a natural street fighter, but he certainly has a record of fighting in the streets of Verona. And he's terribly hot-headed. He's in love all the time. It's almost like a pathology. He has to be in love. There's this excess of animal spirits. He could be treated for this. I know there are potions for it. He has a certain instability. And it doesn't take much in Verona to disturb an otherwise very peaceful day and watch it erupt into hideous violence. And the boys and the men are always engaging in feigning swordplay in the back alleys, and some inexcusable, silly, competitive banter leads to swords being drawn, Capulet and Montague then rushing with long swords, and situations develop very rapidly. 3 civil brawls bred of an airy word. Romeo's romantic. Most of the time he's trying to keep the peace, but he has this idealized view of reality. He's not practical. He's certainly not level-headed. The Tybalt situation shows how dangerous that can be in an insurrection situation. And for Romeo, it's all valor, honor, dispatching Tybalt with fire-eyed fury. And now 2 people are dead. We can't have that.
Are there any other concerns?
Well, Romeo is a Montague, Juliet is a Capulet. Need I say more?
How is banishing Romeo connected to all of these concerns that you've described?
Well, right away, it eliminates the star-crossed lovers problem. To make a long story short, Romeo will go away to Mantua and will probably meet someone else right away. The moment he goes through those gates, he'll see an enchanting woman with long blonde hair and beautiful eyes, and he will be gone again. There is no
question. I remind you that Romeo's dear spouse, Juliet, is with us here today.
She should know whereof she deals. She's so young yet. She has a lot to learn. And after all, this whole storyline started with Romeo pining over a woman called, what's her name? Rosaline, who, by all appearances, joined a nunnery to avoid him. And even if not, there are all sorts of ways for Juliet to join Romeo in Mantua. And there's things in it. Juliet has a very smart old nurse. She has really been around. We have a dossier on her. And they frequent They frequent this funny old monk who doesn't live in a monastery anymore, really. He's sort of by himself, fiddles around a lot with plants and potions, and his name is Friar Lawrence. We keep an eye on him as well. The prince knows about him, and the potions are, of course, something that he controls. But sleeping potions can be safe and effective, and Julia could easily fake her own death, and then she could be sneaked out of Verona by Friar Lawrence. I don't see any downside to such a scheme. And more directly, if Romeo does not leave, the Capulets are likely going to kill him. That mother. The Montagues are going to counterattack and so forth. And any pretense of peace will completely unravel. And for the prince, all that counts is that lives not be disturbed or lost on the streets of Verona. And this is what he has thought of himself. He is so clever, the prince. He is so compassionate. He is so far-thinking.
Yes, thank you, Madam Clarkson. Just a couple of more questions before I turn you over for cross-examination by Mr. Griffin. Are there less intrusive ways for the prince to address the concerns that you described?
Well, as I mentioned, historically princes would approach these situations with a much more blunt and more permanent instrument than banishment. The click-clack of the rack, the little whisk of a cat of nine tails, but not the pain of torture, not the pain of death, not our benevolent prince, that he does not do these things. But there are threats that he could do them, but he will not because of his infinite goodness. Banishment, simply being sent away, is much less extreme than being killed by orders and orders of magnitude. And also, the prince did not permanently ban Romeo. Subjects don't realize, for instance, that they may lower themselves, even perhaps grovel a little to the prince and ask his beneficent forgiveness. Romeo can always beg pardon of the prince.
Are there other positives to banishing Romeo?
There are many positives. It saves his life. The prince could likely have sent Romeo away for his own protection, actually. Protective banishments may be rare, but this is a clear case for one. This person is only an adolescent and a hot-headed one. If the prince didn't kill or exile Romeo, the Capulets certainly would have.
Thank you, Madam Clarkson. Those are my questions. Mr. Griffin?
Parting is such sweet sorrow.
Madam Clarkson, I appear for Romeo Montague, a citizen of Verona.
Indeed.
I've put up your heraldry, verum solum dicatur, verum solum accipiatur. Those words should be familiar to you.
May only the truth be spoken, may only the truth be heard.
And I believe fervently that you're a great subscriber to that. The reason I ask is you recognize, of course, your obligation to this court to be an impartial expert witness.
Definitely.
I couldn't quite hear that.
Definitely.
Thank you. The second question I had was, whose crown is that? Yours or the prince's?
Ah, the prince's, our beneficent prince's, of course, not mine.
I was curious because it came out with you.
It represents in a most solemn and solid and material way the crown, which is the prince's. He incarnates it. I represent it.
Back to impartiality. The other reason I wish to ask was, knowing your background, which I'll come to in a moment, do you really accept, deep down, the opinions that the prosecution has woven into your evidence? And the reason I ask you that is I would like to give you the opportunity, before we go much farther in this cross-examination, to recant your evidence. If you do, we might yet make it to brunch at Giorgio's in the Via Tonelli. Do you?
I appreciate your consideration. I cannot recant it. I must, in all ways, support the decision of the Prince.
You are a citizen of Verona.
Yes, yes.
You recognize that the rights of a citizen, as reflected in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, is at the heart of being a citizen. Correct?
Yes.
Central to that bargain is the right to remain in Verona. Correct?
Perhaps.
Not to be subject to the loss of life and liberty and security of the person except with principles of natural justice.
Ah, yes.
Aye.
Natural justice.
Right. And of course, not to be subject to cruel or unusual punishment or treatment. You accept that?
Definitely not cruel, definitely not unusual.
And as I understand it, after leaving your role as Governor General of Canada, you founded and co-chaired the Institute for Canadian Citizenship.
I did.
And the annual report, which I recently read, emphasizes advancing citizenship and building inclusive societies.
Indeed.
And you subscribe to that very notion of inclusive societies.
Yes, very much so.
You've written lectures belonging the paradox of citizenship. You recall that in 2014?
Yes, I do recall it.
That's right. And at page 80, you've said, at the very least, citizenship guarantees to the citizen a passport and a place in the territory. Correct?
Yes.
This territory being Verona. Correct?
Yes, but he has a passport out now.
Yes,
That is the will of the Prince.
Yes, we've heard about the will of the Prince, and we'll come to that. But notions of inclusion flowing from citizenship, you would agree, are fundamentally inconsistent with the notion of banishment.
Well, I think you have to look at these things case by case. You have to balance off civil disorder, irreconcilable differences, the two families, and the ability to keep the peace and make sure that the city and the body politic is healthy. And as I pointed out, the banishment is not forever. And it is basically to save a life. It is so that the capital punishment will not happen.
We'll come to that. You're familiar with the concept, of course, of royal prerogative. You've testified about it in answer to Ms. Bjorkquist's question. Correct?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. And the royal prerogative are those powers that remain in the crown with origins in the ancient powers of the monarch, correct?
Indeed.
And as Queen's representative as Governor General, there were certain prerogative powers that remained with the office of Governor General, correct?
Yes.
One of those was the prerogative of mercy.
Indeed.
And of course, that is found in part in the letters patent constituting the office of the Governor General, correct?
Yes, since 1547.
Since 1547. And on occasion, you've been asked to exercise that prerogative, correct?
Yes.
And that would be a decision affecting the liberty of the subject?
Indeed.
Just like banishment.
Indeed.
And certainly not a decision to be made immediately or summarily.
Never.
And it certainly was never that with you.
No.
And at minimum, you would seek the advice of at least one minister of the Crown.
At least.
In a deliberate process.
Yes.
Not something spontaneous on the spur of the moment.
No.
Right. And in your hands, the process showed a proper weighing of the various considerations implicit in such an important decision, correct?
Yes.
Not just policy considerations, but those central to the liberty of the subject, correct?
Yes.
All right. As I understand the basis of your evidence, Madam Clarkson, you're testifying about what reasonable limits might be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society to justify the banishment that occurred here, correct?
Yes, correct.
And I take it your opinion is directed towards showing us where those reasonable limits are, correct?
Correct.
And you say they're rooted in a national security purpose as a justification for banishment, correct?
Correct.
I take it you're telling us that there must be identifiable criteria, which we can all see in the statements of the Prince, present for the exercise of that discretion.
That would be preferable.
That certainly would be preferable if it had occurred. You would not expect the conduct of the Prince to be justified on a personal interest, would you?
Never.
Never. No personal bias or interest being shown?
Never.
And you would expect some reasonable balance to be struck between the offense and the punishment, correct?
Indeed.
And lastly, some consideration of the safety of the subject who was being banished. Fair enough?
Fair.
All right. So I wonder if I might turn to the Prince's statements at the time. And firstly, what he said when he warned those who were involved in the events as to what they should do. His words, "If you ever disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace." You recall that?
Indeed, and it's very important that the Prince should have said that.
And perhaps for my purposes, I have to work with somewhat more lawyer-like language than that which the Prince used.
Unfortunately.
Yes. And so I work with the bard for barristers. And the advantage of this, of course, is that on the left-hand side of the page are the true words of the Prince, and on the right are those which a lawyer will understand. So as against, "If you ever disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace," I have, "Listen, dudes, any more 211s in the piazza and the perps are going to get whacked." Now, we know if you slide up to Via Maggiore to the police station and look at the blotter that a 211 is disturbing the peace. You know that, of course, from your imperial connections. So my question was this for you. Disturbing the peace can be a vast range of things, you would agree?
Oh, absolutely.
Jostling in the piazza would be disturbing the peace.
Depends on the degree.
That's right, it could be a capital J jostle.
Or just a little J jiggle.
A skirmish, fisticuffs, sword play, wooden sword play. But you'd agree with me that the Prince's words are, "Any disturbance shall lead to lives being paid to forfeit the peace." You and I can agree on that?
Only on the fact that a disturbance is a disturbance only if it disturbs, and not if it's play.
I see. I see none of that distinction in those words. Do you?
Oh, a bit. Yes, indeed. Because these people, some of them are very, very young. Juliet is 14. She's just 14. And Romeo's 16. What do they know? They're kids. They're practically children. Oh, they're out of the nursery, but they're children.
Let's go back to my question. And the speed of judgment. And for that offense, immediately we do exile him hence. You would agree from looking at what was on the video clip that that happened in a great hurry.
Well, I think that the prince has deliberated so long and so wisely, and with his counselors, that when an occasion happens where a decision must be made, he makes it instantly, but built on a wealth of knowledge and experience and of good wishing for his people.
Well, I worry about
wishes for is the well-being of his people.
I worry about the Prince because, of course, he did say he was deaf to pleading and excuses, and one might wonder whether he was deaf to the counsel as well.
Oh, I don't agree with that. The Prince said he was deaf because it was a metaphor, a manner of speaking. He meant that he hears the things that are relevant to be heard, and he does not the others.
You must be very close to the Prince indeed.
I have his ear.
Lucky Prince. Speaking of luck, I take it you are of the view that Romeo should not complain as the alternative was death.
Absolutely.
Just like Friar Lawrence took the same view, correct?
I beg your pardon?
Just like Friar Lawrence took the same view that Romeo was lucky.
Yes.
But we know from what the Prince said in Act 1 that there would have been no due process, I say, for death or banishment, based on what he said in the early going in this story.
I don't know about that. I don't know that I can agree to that.
How long is this banishment for?
Well, as I said, he could beg for forgiveness.
How long is it for?
It's up to him.
There's no evidence in this record of any length to the banishment.
Well, that's why we don't know. If he went and begged for forgiveness, if he went and kissed the hem of our noble prince and said, please, please, may I return to my beloved city of Verona, who knows what might happen?
Well, of course, Romeo being in Mantua, he is beyond our reach at the moment. And speaking of Mantua, the prince appears to have chosen Mantua as the place of banishment, correct?
Yes.
We know that the Gonzaga dukes of Mantua are under the sway of the Spanish monarch, Philip.
Indeed.
Whose influences reach
Indeed.
far, far into Italy.
Yes.
And
They've reached from Spain to there, so.
Verona has eschewed such an allegiance, choosing to remain independent, correct?
Yes.
There is no sign in the sentence that was given of any consideration by the prince of the effect of dropping a prominent member of a prominent Verona family into Mantua.
You know, ever since the Borgias came from Spain to take over the papacy, we have been trying to deal with this question, counsel, and we are dealing with it.
Well, I was merely trying, Madam Clarkson, to understand this rendition and the effect on a citizen of Verona of it.
It is not a rendition. He does not originally come from there. It is not a rendition. I am sorry, counsel.
So we needn't worry about a subsequent civil settlement of some 10 million ducats being on the horizon?
These kinds of solutions that are monetary are only the physical proof of something which perhaps has disturbed the body politic in a way which made it veer from the correct path. I doubt very much whether we will be in any way giving 10 million ducats to the Montagues.
That's also what the last Prime Minister said.
I am above Prime Ministers. And the Prince is above Prime Ministers.
So I hear. Now, back to the proper national security purpose. You accept, I take it, because you adverted to it in your evidence in chief, that family concerns shouldn't be mixed in with the national security purpose, correct?
Definitely.
And we all know of one's loss of objectivity when one is dealing with personal or family matters as opposed to third-party issues of state.
Yes.
Correct. And we agree, of course, and you've dealt with the facts, that Mercutio was family for the prince.
Mercutio was family.
Right. Tybalt killed Mercutio, correct?
Yes.
By a cowardly thrust as Romeo attempted to break up a fight, correct?
Yes.
Romeo kills Tybalt, correct?
Yes.
To avenge his friend's death, correct? And to avenge the prince's family member, his close friend, correct?
Yes.
So Mercutio himself was not directly part of the Capulet-Montague strife.
He could not help but being of the blood. You know, blood is so important. Counsel, you're not taking into account how important blood is.
Well, we know about the blood in this story. So apart from what the prince told us in Act 1, the prince says, "But I'll immerse you with so strong a fine that you shall all repent the loss of mine," at the banishment of Romeo, correct?
Yes.
The fine is the banishment, correct? I
Yes.
can't hear you. Yes, thank you. The mine is Mercutio,
The
correct?
mine is a Mercutio?
Yes. That you shall all repent the loss of mine,
Yes, yes,
Mercutio. Because family lay a bleeding, correct?
yes. Everybody's related to everybody. Who else are they going to marry? Who else are they going to be married? And they're not all cross-eyed either.
Well, that makes my point. So that might explain why in an instant the prince switched from death as a sentence to banishment without further consideration, correct?
That is your speculation, not mine, counsel.
I wasn't looking for your speculation, I'm looking for your evidence, and I'm suggesting to you that that's a likely explanation for why the prince switched the sentence.
It is not the likely explanation.
I see.
The explanation were the reasons of state.
I see. Now, I take it that because of your relationship with the prince, that you are certainly aware of his activities and his public statements, correct?
Certainly I am.
Yeah. And you would want to know about his bias in this matter, if there was one, as reflected in his current thinking, correct?
Indeed, indeed.
And you keep up with the social media here in Verona?
Definitely. Definitely. We Twitter. He Twitters. He Twitters.
And we've intercepted some Twitters. Carrier pigeon born. And may it please the court, I will prove these separately if necessary. The carrier pigeon is in the wings and anxious to testify if necessary. So may I show you the first tweet? That's your prince, right?
Well, I mean, it's a way of communicating with the public in less than 140 characters. And the prince is, I think, learning how to do this in the most delicate and profound way, with only the good of his people at heart, because he knows that is the way they communicate with each other, and therefore he is going to do this as well. I think that's quite a neat little tweet.
There is a second one with a second pigeon carrier.
What did you do to the pigeon? What did you do to the pigeon?
Pigeon will testify if you push it.
I may.
I suggest to you that these two tweets would not support the opinion you have given of a state purpose, but would indicate a personal bias.
Oh, I don't think so. Oh, I don't think it's a personal bias. I think it's the right of princes to be able to explain to their people in language that is theirs, and that's what tweets are now, language of the people, exactly what has happened and transpired. And that's what we see in these elegant little tweets. I'm deeply moved to see that the prince was able to do this. I had not seen the second one. Marvelous. He's learned so much.
You can read more into 60 characters than most people. So I come to this conclusion in respect to my examination of you, Madam Clarkson.
Conclusion.
Yes, conclusion. You and I can agree that the prince's personal interest and bias seems to have entered into his decision.
We do not agree on this.
All right, we do not agree. You and I can find no identifiable criteria for the exercise of this power.
Absolutely not. It's wrong what you're saying. He killed somebody in a flash. I mean, it is at the very least manslaughter, and he has to pay some price for it. Otherwise, the body politic is out of order. The body politic starts to rot. The body politic starts to smell. We have to have order We must have it at all costs, and this is so much better than executing Romeo. He has his life ahead of him. He's going to have a healthy, happy, prosperous life in Mantua, that beautiful little place, even if the Spaniards are there.
Well, I was going to close by inviting you to recant the heresies of your opinion. I take it that you persist.
Oh, definitely. I do not say I persist. I simply have told you what I know to be the truth and what I know to be the thing that creates public order and makes it possible for princes to rule.
Well, we've seen the effect of the rule. Thank you, Madam Clarkson.
Counsel.
We'll entertain argument from counsel. Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Chief Justice. I am going first in support of setting aside the ban on Romeo. Romeo has every right guaranteed to a citizen of Verona under our charter, and I submit that guarantees him to be free of banishment from Verona. There can be no argument, though backstage I developed the sense that my friend, Ms. Bjorkquist, the Prince's prosecutor, will persist in this, but there can be no argument that banishment is but a clear charter breach. Augmented
is that rights of citizenship trump state security.
Former Justice Cromwell, may I have a moment with the audience? Members of the audience, I was worried that this was going to happen. This is something that affects advocates all the time. And by the way, this is for your ears only. As you can see, judges don't have a lot to do up there. And so one of the things that they like to do is ask a question. And they like to be first out of the gate with a question. But the other aspect of judging, especially as you get to the more serious courts such as this one, is that judges work to develop the impossible question. And the impossible question is one in which they can pop to a lawyer and a lawyer can't answer. Now, they don't do this alone. They have law clerks. And the law clerks work in the back rooms like platoons of Rumpelstiltskins, developing the impossible question. And then, developed as it is, the race is on to be first out the gate to ask the question. Now, this creates a great deal of stress amongst our judges. Some crack under the pressure, those who leave earlier than others. Our Chief Justice is made of sterner stuff. And Chief Justice Fraser, I know not as well. She's a bit of an enigma to me, but she seems, from the length of time she's held her job, to be able to withstand this. So we as lawyers have to develop techniques to deal with some of these questions, so let's see how we do.
I call for order in the court.
Yeah. I didn't quite capture your question, former Justice Cromwell.
Perhaps if you hadn't been so busy doing a soliloquy, you would The question was quite simple. Apparently the answer is elusive. Do the rights of citizenship trump state security? That seems to be your position.
Well, let me deal with that two ways. First,
Deflection was your first way, I think.
reflection. First, I'll answer it when I get to it. Secondly, in case my time is used up by an interventionist bench, please refer to paragraphs 25, 27, 26B, 29, and 35, and a hint of it in paragraph 36 of my factum.
I have your factum. It stops at paragraph 7.
You're not reading between the lines. I can't argue in front of you that the rights of the citizen in all circumstances trump state security. What I can tell you is in these circumstances, we have a personal bias, we have lack of identifiable criteria, we have no linkage between the nature of the offense and the result, and no mindfulness of the safety of the individual. And in my respectful submission, in those circumstances, the Prince's personal bias caused that cascade of results which led to what we're dealing with. And I might stop for a second and say, and I will come to this, that you should be very cautious about the expert evidence. It should be rejected out of hand. I didn't jump up to object to the qualifications of this expert when I should have, because my mic was off.
You seem to have overcome that problem.
But I would be very cautious. So I've expressed at the outset of my argument the sections of the Charter that I rely upon. Charter must be interpreted generously. That's the job of this court, to deal with enhancing and enshrining those protections. The intimate relationship between the citizen, here Romeo, and Verona invites this approach in this context. And the Supreme Court of Canada, in the Catroni case, has told us that the Charter doesn't say that a citizen has a right not to be arbitrarily expelled from Verona. It guarantees the right to remain in Verona. Now, subsequent cases have enshrined that principle. I won't take you through the law, but it's continued right up to the recent time with reminders from the court that the right to remain in Verona is amongst the most cherished rights of citizenship. So what this case is really about is, can this infringement on those rights be justified in a free and democratic society? Verona is supposed to be a free and democratic society. One would scratch one's head a tad, having heard from the expert witness, as to the degree to which that extends. But the onus of demonstrating this lies upon the Prince and the Prince's prosecutor. So I simply say that the Prince cannot ever expect to meet the onus of demonstrating that. There is an elephant in this theater, the suggestion of Friar Lawrence that Romeo is lucky he's not dead. And that seems to be a default position that's taken throughout this. Now, Friar Lawrence, as an aside, is a meddlesome cleric who deserves a one-way ticket himself to Mantua. But he said a gentler judgment vanished from his lips, not body's death, but body's banishment. I say, as the evidence demonstrates, a sentence of death would have been equally constitutionally flawed if it had been administered. So let's just forget about that. Now, parenthetically, the play would have been considerably shorter. And Mr. Ciminino would not have had to invest in a balcony. So let's talk about the witness. The witness is no expert at all. The witness is an emanation of the Prince. The witness arrives with the crown. The witness departs with the crown. In my respectful submission, what is her expertise? Is it being a princeling? Is it being invested with the trappings of power to justify its arbitrary exercise? Despite her brave effort, her heart wasn't in it. Her background doesn't support it. She faltered. She dodged. She prevaricated. She didn't have the whole story. And her underlying assumptions of national security purpose, identifiable criteria, no personal interest or bias, some reasonable balance between the offense and punishment, and suitable precautions don't survive. So how did all of this play out? Despite a valid state purpose, the personal interest of the prince becomes obvious in the spilled blood of mine, his relative Mercutio, the instantaneous personal reaction supported by social media of a 17th century sort. There are no reasonable linkages, no legislation, no nothing that creates a reasonable limit in less than an arbitrary way. And as the prince himself tells us, I will be deaf to pleading and excuses, and to the scurrilous circumstances of Tybalt's cowardly thrust, a true Capulet, at the very moment that Romeo tried to restore order. Let's not confuse ourselves about the notion of royal prerogative, writ large in the expert. Our courts have looked at that issue where it comes to a policy conclusion, such as when a certain now lord in the United Kingdom was focused on the exercise of royal prerogative by the Prime Minister, venturing, of course, into the political. Here we are dealing with the liberty of the subject, as conceded by the witness. Arbitrary royal power does not rule in Verona. So in conclusion, Romeo does not belong in Mantua. Romeo belongs right here in Verona.
Thank you. Counsel for the Prince.
Chief Justice, Madam Justice Fraser, Mr. Justice Cromwell. By way of introduction, you may be tempted to think of this case as a simple case about a young man who got caught up in a street fight and avenged the death of a friend in the heat of the moment. Why not just send Romeo to jail, you might ask? This case is much more than that. It is a case about a serious threat to peace and civil order. It is a case about a blood feud so volatile and so deeply entrenched that it threatens the very security of Verona, generation after generation, day after day. And this threat is arguably more significant than any threat from any other state. This is a threat from within. First, Romeo is not just an overly passionate romantic, as Mr. Griffin would have you believe. In his own words, Romeo was guided by fire-eyed fury, a way to heaven respective leniency, enough with mercy and consideration. More importantly, Romeo himself noted, presciently, and I quote, "This day's black fate on more days doth depend. This but begins the woe others must end." The feud between Romeo's family, the Montagues, and Juliet's family, the Capulets, was already too bloody and too enduring. I ask you to recall the prince's words when a riot broke out on the streets of Verona just days before. Rebellious subjects, enemies to peace, profaners of this neighbor-stained steel, will they not hear? These are the words of a prince fighting to restore peace. Peace to his land, security to his people who are turning their weapons against their own neighbors, and they would not listen to him. The prince warned them, "You men, you beasts, that quench the fire of your pernicious rage, with purple fountains issuing from your veins, on pain of torture from those bloody hands, throw your mistempered weapons to the ground and hear the sentence of your moved prince." This was the prince's final warning. 3 civil brawls, bred of an airy word, by the old Capulet and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets and made Verona's ancient citizens cast by their grave beseeming ornaments to wield old partisans in hands as old, cankered with peace to part your cankered hate. If you ever disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. The prince warned that there will be no more riots because of a casual word thrown provocatively between a Capulet and a Montague. The prince saw peace-abiding citizens of Verona having to pick up their rusty old swords and being drawn into battle to separate Capulets and Montagues in the throes of bloody battle on the streets. This was a blood feud gone too far. The prince warned, if you ever cause a disturbance on the streets of Verona again, you will pay for it with your lives. Jail is not enough. Romeo's continued presence in Verona, on the streets, or in a jail, would have risked inflaming the feud. The prince's word would mean nothing.
So the state should deal with its problems by exporting them?
Indeed, my lord, in this circumstance, this was the last straw for the prince. He had warned and warned. The bloody battles continue. Peace must be restored.
But if citizenship has some responsibilities for the citizen, doesn't it have some responsibilities for the state in dealing with its own problems rather than shipping them somewhere else?
You make a good point, my lord.
I'm liking you better than Griffin so far.
However, you must remember, my lord, that the prince banished Romeo to live in Mantua, despite what you heard in Mr. Griffin's attempt to cast ill over the city of Mantua. Mantua is a lovely place. You heard Madam Clarkson talk about Mantua. He banished Romeo to Mantua for Romeo's own protection, as well as for the protection of the citizens. And this was for the protection of all Veronian citizens. It had come to this point. And I beseech you not to fall to the pressures of social media here. The banishment of Romeo should not be confused with the Mantuan ban that the prince ran on in the last election. He now realizes the folly of such a blanket policy. The prince is now committed to using his royal prerogative to protect the security of Verona in a tailored fashion that is respectful of the values reflected in the Verona Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This ban on Romeo is precisely such a measure. Even if the executive order is assumed to infringe Romeo's charter-protected mobility rights, and I don't necessarily concede that, Mr. Griffin, this limitation of his rights is fully justified in a free and democratic society. In fact, Romeo's banishment, I submit, is essential to restore Verona from a state besieged by civil order and tragedy, where ancient grudge has broken to new mutiny and civil blood makes civil hands unclean, from a long-standing hatred between these two clans within its very walls. The prince has the absolute royal prerogative to protect Verona from threats to public order, embodied in undesirables the likes of Romeo. Deference must be shown. The prince must be supported in exercising his discretion to restore fair Verona to the peaceful land it once was, to guarantee Verona's citizens the right and the freedom to walk the streets in peace and to restore its citizens' faith in the rule of law. I will now turn to my submissions on the law and the application of the Charter. My submissions will cover the following. I will deal very briefly with Romeo's right to fair process. I will then turn to the balancing of rights under the Charter. And while the Charter guarantees the right to be free from banishment, that right is not absolute. That right can be infringed in a manner that is consistent with such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. The prince has satisfied his burden. Madam Clarkson's evidence in chief established the prince's ultimate duty to protect its citizens, the citizens of Verona, the prince's goal to restore peace. The prince has the royal prerogative to issue executive orders banning undesirables from Verona in the interests of state security. This prerogative is absolute and essentially unfettered. The prince concedes that executive orders can be reviewed under the Charter. The prince also concedes that Romeo, as a citizen of Verona, has standing to invoke the provisions of the Charter. But when it turns to infringement of the Charter, we submit that any infringement is justified in a free and democratic society. I will deal first briefly with Mr. Griffin's argument that the process was unfair. I can be quick here. Romeo does not have a viable argument that his Section 7 Charter rights were infringed. Let's be clear. Romeo killed Tybalt on the street, cold blood on the streets of Verona. Romeo's own father confessed that to the prince. Then Romeo comes and whines that he did not receive a fair process prior to being banished from Verona. And what does he rely on? he focuses entirely on one rhyming couplet within the prince's reasons, issuing the banishment order. I will be deaf to pleading and excuses, nor tears nor prayers shall purchase out abuses. As this court well knows, the prince's reasons are usually more focused on achieving iambic pentameter than legal clarity. However, the reality is that the process was fair in these circumstances. It does not require a perfect process when dealing with state security. The prince was exposed to the whole picture. Romeo was given the opportunity to respond, and he did through his special advocate, his father. Indeed, the evidence at trial revealed that Romeo's own father, Montague, as much as admitted to the prince that Romeo was a danger to the community. When the prince asked, Romeo slew him, he slew Mercutio. Who now the price of his dear blood doth owe? Montague, Romeo's own father and special advocate, admitted to the prince himself that Romeo's crime did justice's job by taking Tybalt's life. Montague said, not Romeo, prince, he was Mercutio's friend. His fault concludes but what the law should end, the life of Tybalt. How did the prince respond? The famous words, and for that offense, immediately we do exile him hence. Mr. Griffin submitted very briefly that this may be a case of cruel and unusual punishment. He did not even bother to argue that point. I am going to submit simply that there is nothing cruel or unusual about immediate banishment from Verona. There is no merit to the argument that exile is grossly disproportionate because, quote, as Romeo says, there is no world without Verona walls but purgatory, torture, hell itself. Suffice it to say that Romeo has a gift for romantic overstatement. In fact, the evidence of Friar Lawrence, whose reputation was somewhat besmirched by Mr. Griffin today, was that the prince turned that black word death to banishment. This is dear mercy, and Romeo sees it not. Madame Clarkson's evidence was that Mantua is lovely. Banishment to Mantua with its lovely piazzas is not cruel and unusual punishment. Section 6.1 of the Charter provides that a citizen has the right to remain. The prince concedes that the executive order banishing Romeo from Verona prima facie infringes his Section 6.1 right to remain in Verona. However, the purpose of this order was not the purpose of excluding from membership in the national community. That is what the Charter is meant to protect. In contrast, the purpose of the travel ban, in this case, is to protect Verona from undesirables like Romeo, who stir up trouble and endanger the security of Verona and its princedom. Assuming that you might conclude that Section 6.1 of the Charter has been breached, under Section 1 of the Charter, state security concerns justify infringing Romeo's mobility rights in the circumstances before you. Section 6.1, as Mr. Griffin admits, is subject to reasonable limits prescribed by law that can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society under Section 1 of the Charter. Verona is a free and democratic society under the noble prince. Infringements of Section 6.1 have been routinely saved as being demonstrably justified under Section 1 of the Charter, at least in the extradition context with which you're familiar. Like with the prince's discretion whether to extradite an accused to Mantua, his discretion to banish security risks also attracts a high degree of deference. As the Chief Justice of Canada has explained once in the extradition context, this is primarily a political decision. Courts should interfere with the minister's discretion only in the clearest of cases. The prince's power to banish undesirables who are citizens may not be absolute or entirely unfettered, but it is close to that. The prince is responsible for protecting the security of Verona, and courts should be very cautious about interfering.
What standard of review do you recommend? Reasonableness, correctness, possible reasonableness, or all three?
All three of the above, thank you. The lowest possible standard. The important point to take away from this is that, other than in the clearest of cases, the prince's powers will not be questioned. Now, despite the evidence of Madame Clarkson, the prince has met his burden in this case.
He has demonstrated that the infringement of Romeo's rights under Section 6 is both necessary and proportional and is justified under Section 1 of the Charter. Very briefly on the test under Section 1 of the Charter.
Madam Bjorkquist?
Yes.
Sorry, Madam. We have a hard stop at 11:45.
Okay, thank you. I will wrap it up.
I've already gone several minutes longer than Mr. Griffin.
Counsel, we have your
You have
factum.
enough? May I just wrap up in 1 minute then? Even if you conclude that the executive order infringes Romeo's Section 6(1) rights, the infringement is demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Romeo and Juliet will live happily ever after in Mantua until their families stop feuding, assuming that no tragic miscommunication will cause any story of woe. And in the meantime, by paying deference to the prince's decision, this honorable court will take one bold and necessary step toward putting the body politic back in order, restoring the rule of law, and making Verona great again. Thank you.
Mr. Griffin, do you feel it necessary? Did you find anything in that to reply to?
Chief Justice, I lost her at the very beginning. The second thing I would say...
You have something in common.
The second thing I would say is, be careful. Too much law fogs the mind.
Well spoken, well spoken. Well, it is our custom on the Supreme Court of Stratford to take several months to deliberate each case. However, I have just been advised that we have, what kind of stop? A hard stop. There's a concept to introduce in the Supreme Court of Canada. A hard stop at 11:45. So I am going to presume on my fellow judges to ask whether they would be willing to give their brief reasons immediately. Tout suite. Justice Fraser, Chief Justice.
Thank you so much, Chief Justice. Before I begin, may I just say this? What an audience. It's huge. This is the largest audience ever to appear in any courtroom in the entire history of the world.
Before Chief Justice Fraser goes any further, I should tell you that we as judges are used to maybe 1.5 people in our courtrooms.
There must be 1 million or 1.5 million people here. Excuse me, can we get a camera on this crowd? I want to show how large it is. Please? No, they're not going to do it. They never do. To uphold or not to uphold the prince's banishment order, that is the question. Romeo claims that this order exiling him from Verona constitutes cruel and unusual punishment and a breach of his mobility rights under the Charter. These trumped-up arguments cannot succeed. They're laughable. This is probably the least innocent person I've ever seen. A total disaster. This case is a perfect example of a perpetrator of a crime making the issue all about him. Sad, so sad, really sad. Something is rotten in the city of Verona, and it's not the banishment order. We've heard a lot of made-up, phony facts. The real facts are these. Tybalt, the nephew of Lady Capulet and cousin of Juliet, killed Romeo's friend Mercutio. And Romeo then killed Tybalt. This was revenge, pure and simple. Romeo is a loser, total loser, zero credibility. He claims he was merely trying to break up a fight between these two guys. Admittedly, there was violence on many sides, But Romeo's actions were not in defense of his friend Mercutio. Mercutio was long dead when Romeo responded with, to use his own words, fire-eyed fury. Fire and fury, absolutely disgraceful. Major loser, guilty as hell. For this murder, Escalus, the Prince of Verona, sentenced Romeo to exile from Verona. This punishment was lenient, in fact, watered down, politically correct, weak. Even though Lady Capulet had demanded that Romeo must not live, the prince ordered mere banishment. But make no mistake, the prince did vow to have Romeo killed should he return. In the prince's words, mercy but murders, pardoning those that kill. And rightly said. After all, leaders cannot just go around pardoning people for no good reason. Despite this lenient punishment, Romeo argues that the prince's order was unconstitutional. I cannot agree. Nothing will come of nothing. And this argument is a big bunch of nothing. The prince's order is justifiable and proportionate to protect public order and security. Someone has to keep our country safe from undesirables. And Romeo is certainly an undesirable. He killed Tybalt. Romeo is totally out of control. He claims he just wants to return to Verona to court Juliet. Not true. Romeo is lying on so many levels. The worst liar ever, lying Romeo. Of course, we will never know Romeo's true intentions. He recently wrote Juliet many, many letters, but he retrieved them and then destroyed them. Bad judgment, has lost all credibility, crooked, really crooked. And speaking of Juliet, one cannot forget that Romeo has also ravaged this young girl who, at only 13 years of age, is incapable of giving legal consent. Romeo is one bad hombre, bad dude. And on top of everything, we don't even know if he's Italian. Romeo claims he was born in Verona, but he doesn't have a birth certificate. Or if he does, there's something on that certificate that's very bad for him. Very bad. The prince's order has been referred to pejoratively as a travel ban. It is not. Romeo doth protest too much, methinks. The fact is that Romeo is free to travel wherever else he likes. As Friar Lawrence noted when consoling Romeo, the world is broad and wide. Indeed, Romeo has already fled to the historic city of Mantua, 40 kilometers south of Verona, which, by the way, is beautiful this time of year. Beautiful! By the way, do you know that I own a winery and golf course in Mantua? It's one of the best wineries in Italy. Everyone says so. And believe me, it's the biggest golf course ever. 22 holes. Romeo is also free to travel to Venice or Bologna or Florence or elsewhere in the kingdom. So this is clearly not a travel ban. And those suggesting otherwise are spreading fake news, very dishonest. They lie like dogs over and over again. Don't let them fool you. The travel ban's purpose is clear, to keep the citizens of fair Verona safe. And yet it's suggested that the prince issued this order with an ulterior motive. More fake news, totally untrue, witch hunt, biased, totally biased. They say the prince only issued the order against Romeo because Mercutio was a member of the royal family. Admittedly, the prince did say as much, telling Montague that all shall repent the loss of his blood relative Mercutio. But this court cannot accept that statement as proof. Everyone knows that you can't take what a leader says literally or seriously, and especially not tweets. There are always alternative facts. It comes down to this. There's no proper foundation for second-guessing the prince's motives. Leaders would never use their power to settle personal feuds or seek revenge or protect their own family members. In making the order, the prince was clearly concerned with the enemies of the people, those in Verona whose civil brawls thrice disturb the quiet of our streets. He has the right to protect the city from civil strife and return it to its former peace. It's not like he's building a wall around the city and asking Romeo to pay for it. In other words, the true purpose of the prince's order is to make Verona great again. And what better way to do so than to banish criminals like Romeo? Let's not forget, Romeo is guilty, big league guilty, big league. Wouldn't know the truth if it hit him in the face. Besides, I will praise any man that will praise me. And the prince has been very nice to me, very nice. He's called my judgments tremendous. He has said they're the best judgments he's ever heard. And he has pointed out that other so-called judges do not write as well. He didn't mean you, Chief Justice. Oh, and by the way, Romeo, if you think I've forgotten about your Section 7 argument, I haven't. I thought a lot about it, and it too fails. The fact is that Juliet is free to move anywhere else in the country with Romeo. So Romeo's lost nothing, except what will likely come from marrying a 13-year-old whom he's known for less than 24 hours. And believe me, even if I'd found a charter breach, which I've not, I would have found the banishment order was a reasonable limitation and saved under Section 1. And so, to those who would question the order of the prince, who say he's unable to distinguish between right and wrong, I would say this: there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. For these reasons, I would dismiss the appeal. The banishment order stands. One final point. For those who ask, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? His answer better be, not in Verona.
Well, thank you, Justice Justice Fraser, Justice Cromwell.
I'm certainly going to be a lot more careful when I go to Alberta. Before pronouncing my judgment, I simply would like to offer a sincere apology to the Bard, and particularly to any of you who are especially fond of Sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, Romeo to our court did supplicate, and troubled deaf heaven with his bootless cries, and looked upon himself and cursed his fate, wishing that we would make him rich in hope. Skilled Griffin, making light of his offense, employing this man's art and that man's scope, though what I most enjoyed persuaded least. Yet in my thoughts, from deepest law arising, haply I think on belonging, an urge that is not rare, and on our charter, like the sun at break of day arising above an even prince's power, we must be fair. And so our rights such justice to us brings, that we judges dare to break the rule of kings. And thus I would the appeal allow, and set poor Romeo a free right now.
Well, as usual, the Chief Justice, having had the benefit of all the other judges talking before her, hasn't the need to say very much. I have listened with respect to Chief Justice Fraser's passionate and compassionate defense of Romeo and condemnation of the prince. I have listened to the mellifluous poetry of my colleague Cromwell, unusual in Supreme Court justices, present or past, I must say. I have only a few comments to add, having regard to the hard deadline. The public peace is a precious thing, and Verona had a problem. The prince warned his subjects at the outset. Rebellious subjects, throw down your bloody weapons, and then he told them what would happen if they didn't. If ever you disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. So, everybody knew what was going to happen. That is not why I fault the prince. It did happen, and as we've heard, it led to tragic consequences. The prince's motivations were of the noblest. He wanted to keep the peace. The problem was, he was woefully deficient as a judge. What kind of judgment is this, given on the street corner or the stage or the piazza, on the spot, without evidence except one person who says, oh, Romeo didn't do it, but if he did do it, he's okay, and a screaming mother of a victim? Well, there's something to be said for victims having their say before the court, but still, this is carrying that concept a bit far, I would think. But there are so many more defects in the judgment. Just let me enunciate a couple. First of all, the prince shouldn't have been doing this. He should have had his independent Section 96 judge doing it. He had no right to be doing this, and it shows. Secondly, he wasn't trained. He didn't have the benefit of Parliament saying that judges needed training in all matters. Thirdly, the judgment is much too short. We on the Supreme Court of Canada know that minimum for a good judgment is 97 pages. So what is this? It goes from line 187 to, I don't know, about 200. Not much. Not nearly long enough. Fourthly, it's not in both official languages. I searched. I looked for the French text. And then they said, well, it wasn't even in English originally. I said, well, where do we go from here? This is clearly contrary to our constitutional laws. It is a defective judgment in every way. And then finally, it's fundamentally unclear. I mean, what do you make of this? Judgment should be clear. And we on the Supreme Court of Canada always take the utmost care to make sure that every line, every paragraph, every page, and particularly the conclusion, is crystal clear. Oh, I know occasionally they have to do little corrections, but that doesn't matter. We have a system for that. But look at this judgment. First of all, the prince says, immediately do we exile him. And then he calls it a fine. And then he says he'll be deaf to pleadings and excuses, indicating maybe there's a little wiggle room. And then he says, get out of town, Romeo, or I will. That will be your last hour. Well, what's he saying? Is he saying you're dead? Is he saying get out of town? Is he pronouncing a capital punishment sentence? Is he inviting a plea for mercy? I can't figure this judgment out. All I can figure out is that Romeo, who's not a lawyer, hadn't had time to go to law school yet, is thinking, it doesn't look good. I better get to Mantua. But how is a court such as this, August Court of Stratford, to rule on such a mishmash of a judgment? I fear we cannot. But taking the matter just for interest's sake, at its highest, assuming this were a justiciable document, what's wrong with it, as Chief Justice Fraser says? Romeo has to leave town to go south for the winter. Let's judge this by Canadian standards. Millions of Canadians leave town each winter for Florida, Palm Springs, Hawaii, others point south. This is hardly cruel and unusual by Canadian standards, and I should say, what better standards are there? Canadian justice is recognized throughout the world as the epitome of justice. Good, clear, fair, constitutional justice. So there's nothing even if this were a justiciable order, there's nothing so bad about this. Romeo says, he says, exile is purgatory, torture, hell itself. A romantic overstatement. The only reason it's torture and hell itself is that he's being parted from Juliet. But as my colleagues have pointed out, Juliet's quite free to leave. And furthermore, another defect in the judgment, the prince has no jurisdiction over Mantua. He can't keep him there. Romeo can go wherever he wants. Well, I think I've said enough. I think I'm coming up against the hard deadline. But my solution to this problem, my remedy, is a different one than my colleagues. I don't think we can uphold this miserable judgment, if that's what we can call it. We have to send it back to the prince for reconsideration. Now, I recognize there's a couple of problems there. First of all, sadly, Romeo and Juliet seem to have taken their lives over this matter. But we know that even more important than what happens in real people's lives as a result of court judgments is the validity and the veracity and the beauty of the judgment itself. Therefore, I am remitting this back to the prince for reconsideration.
I'm a lawyer. Well, I was until today, actually. This is actually exactly like a real court case. I've seen that happen all the time. So this is the 5th year of the mock appeal, and as was said before, probably the only true thing that was said, this is the most successful, the largest crowd we've ever had. Maybe that's because, and that happens, by the way, notwithstanding the fact that we double the price every year. So I want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for attending, particularly those who have been here before and for whom it's a return visit. You know, there was a time in the practice of law where courtrooms actually were the main entertainment center. People would go to the villages and watch lawyers argue, and it was very dramatic, melodramatic. And that has sort of gone out of style in recent decades. Although, as you could see from what we happened, both lawyers and judges hanker for the stage, and they look for one here. But I want to also acknowledge some of the real actors that graced the stage this summer. Juliet, Sarah Farb, who's right here. Prince Escalus, Juan Corleone. And in the wings, Montague, played by Jim Codrington, and Randy Houston, captain over there. Those are the people who make this a world-renowned stage. And if you've seen the performance, or about to see the performance of Romeo and Juliet, you'll see that this is an unrivaled place for extraordinary theater. And we saw, my wife and I, Romeo and Juliet earlier this summer, and I must say that I winced in painful recognition when I saw the effect of the sleeping potion, how quickly it worked, because it kind of recognized the effect my submissions have on judges from time to time. I also want to thank, of course, Anthony Cimolino and Anita Gaffney and Kira Loughran, who helped us put this event together. I want to thank the lawyers. This, in particular, this may look a little easier because it's done with humor, and in fact, it's a lot more stress to try to do this in front of such a large crowd, but thank you very much for appreciating our work. Now, I don't know what to say about Madame Clarkson, frankly. She, the person renowned for defending human rights, played with incredible vigor and vivacity against type. All I can say is that the expert fees check must have been huge. Finally, the judges. Like, one of the great privileges I have as impresario is I get to pick the judges every year with no process whatsoever, no transparency whatsoever, no control whatsoever. And it's quite a heady experience. It makes you want to be prime minister, you know? I started to take selfies around the place. I'd like to thank particularly Chief Justice Catherine Fraser, the first Chief Justice of the province of Alberta and appointed in 1992. Thank you. Thomas Cromwell, who last year retired from the Supreme Court of Canada. It's a great loss to the court, but a great gain to the rest of us who were sick and tired of losing in his judgments. And finally, I want to say a special thank you to Chief Justice McLachlin. And I have to tell you, it's difficult to do this without some emotion. This is the 5th time that she has presided the Supreme Court of Stratford, so she's been here since the first event. And she's presided in each and every year. This is the last one that she will preside as Chief Justice of Canada, having announced her retirement as of December 15th, 2017. Now, mandatory retirement at 75 may have seemed a good idea to somebody, but surely we can ask ourselves whether it is in this particular case. I think I speak for all of you that we would like to have an exception to that rule in this particular case. She was appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada in 1989 and became its Chief Justice in 2000, its first female Chief Justice and longest serving Chief Justice. She heard well over 2,000 cases and authored or co-authored hundreds of decisions and opinions from the Supreme Court. It's actually a wonder, having worked so hard for Canadians and Canadian justice, that she could devote so much time and so much energy in supporting the arts all over Canada, including at the National Arts Centre, but of course here in Stratford, Ontario. It just boggles the mind. I'd like to leave you on this topic with an image of the Chief Justice of Canada leading her court in the Supreme Court of Canada. As an advocate who've had the chance to appear there several times, every single time I see the big doors of the court open and the Chief Justice leading her colleagues, it just brings shivers up my spine, obviously born out of terror in large part as to what's going to come. But principally, and I'm sure I can speak for all of my colleagues, it's because of seeing and experiencing the pride we all have to see this remarkable jurist, this remarkable woman, serve her country so well as Chief Justice. So I laugh. This is not a perfect rendition, but I just asked backstage to roll the tape to just give you a taste of what it feels like to see the Chief Justice enter the court.
La Cour.
Thank you. You may be seated.
That's I hope, Chief Justice, you will not hold me in contempt if I ask the crowd assembled here to disobey your order and stand up and thank you for your service.
Thank you so much. And hence into exile.
I have a feeling that some judges will try that in their court from time to time. So let me close with this. First of all, to thank you again, to remind you that tomorrow actually you have the chance of getting another view of the Chief Justice as she's doing at the Avon Theatre with Lord Robinson, a fireside chat entitled, I think, A View from the Bench. That's at 10:30 tomorrow morning. And to invite you, as I alluded perhaps euphemistically, this event has been provided for free for the last 5 years, and we invite you to reflect on becoming a member of the Stratford family and supporting the extraordinary work that the actors, the directors, and everyone at Stratford puts on our stage. Thank you very much for coming.
Or
day you called, the sun was big